Hi, Professor Satya. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, nice to be here. Thanks.
Uh, Professor Satya, you are a mechanical engineer by training and profession,
Aerospace.
aerospace engineer. Um, how did you fall in love with combustion? Because I think the major part of your research and your work at IIT Madras was based on combustion, right?
Right. When I joined aerospace engineering, I could have done aerodynamics, structures of propulsion. So I started thinking about engines and rockets. And one of my uh, professors back then at the undergraduate level had a internship to like an undergraduate research assistantship, because he had his PhD student, and the PhD student required some help in the lab. So I had like a summer research assistantship as an undergraduate, the end of my second year, and so this PhD student was burning a lot of solid rocket fuel, and he got me to burn more for him, and so I was just a second year student. At the end of my second year, I had no idea. They would just give me the procedure to burn stuff, and I would just burn stuff and so on. So that's how it started.
Okay. So with the professorship at IIT Madras, what are some of the areas of research that you currently focused on?
Oh, yeah. Currently, I'm actually primarily looking at electric aircraft, um, kind of moved away from combustion. But combustion still haunts me in the sense there are hybrid options like electric combustion hybrids that I'm looking at. Yeah, that's what I'm primarily doing.
Yeah, we will come to the electric aircraft part in some time. You were also a key member in the founding of Agnikul Cosmos, and recently on May 30th, the company successfully launched what they claim to be the world's first rocket with a single 3D printed engine. What is the founding story behind Agnikul Cosmos? Because IIT Madras has been sort of a field for a lot of startups in India, especially Aether comes to mind fairly recently. So what is the story behind Agnikul Cosmos? I was researching on the co-founders a little bit, and seems like they were not IIT Madras alumni. At least one of them was not. Did a master's in the US and then moved back. How did you all get connected, and how did it start?
Yeah, I think Srinath and Moin are my co-founders there, Technical, and I think Srinath is actually very good at cold calls and connects and all that stuff. Uh, he tries to do that very effectively. So, um, so I think he also kind of has a very nice storyline in his mind on how things would pan out and what are the right touch points to look at and so on. He's a very good strategist in that sense. So, I mean, all these things were hindsight to me, but there's a lot more hindsight actually. So, but let me just, you know, peel the onion in layers. So one day, so we had a CEO at the Combustion Center at that time, and he's an alumnus of IIT Madras as well, a little bit older than me. And so he came back. He came and told me that one of his other alumni colleagues um, wanted me to talk to this gentleman in the US who wants to make rockets in India, and that was curious enough. But then it turns out that this guy was connecting to the president of what's called as ADAT, Aerospace Industries Development Association of Tamil Nadu. That's a very nice connection point for him. And that gentleman connected him to the other alumnus, and that alumnus connected to the CEO, and then the CEO. So it's actually like a four, levels removed, trail, none of which I was aware of. All I knew was that there was a online call that was set up, and there was this guy who was actually showing up from LA, talking to me, and he said that he wanted to, make rockets in India, and I simply said, "Come on over."
Hmm. That's fascinating because I did my PhD in Virginia Tech, and I did it in composite materials, and I kind of know the struggles of breaking into the aerospace industry as an immigrant who is not a citizen or a green card holder. Was that one of the main pushes for Srinath, in the sense that, maybe he wanted to do something here, and a lot of us actually realize the situation only after coming to the US. And I know a few universities in America are like, hey, are you going to apply for aerospace? If you are, just make sure that you have your backup plans just in case things don't work out. So does Srinath have a similar story?
No, no. So yeah, yeah. So I'll just complete that entire story on how we got connected. So I said, "Come on over," right? And then he comes. I think this was sometime in July or August of 2017, and he came in by about maybe September, probably, from the US, and we started meeting. Then he brought in Moin. I'm not completely sure if Moin was there in the first call, but in the second meeting, I remember I used to actually meet people in my home balcony at my campus home. So I just got them over, and we started talking. Um, and I had like very fancy ideas that we need to actually do like balloon assisted launches and all that stuff. And they were just patiently listening to my rambling, because probably because they had some innate respect for an IIT professor, but I think more than that, they wanted to get something done with me. So after all of that stuff, we just decided that we will work together. And I think in October, we incorporated the company. And by December, I think Srinath had made up his mind that he will leave the US for good and come back. So he went to US momentarily and then packed his bags and then just came back for good. So all of these things happened in just about a 5-6 months time frame for him in his life, which he probably did not expect will pan out, because long later is maybe about 1 or 2 years later, uh, people started noticing about Agnikul because they started raising funds and all that stuff. So there were podcasts and all that. So I think in those early days, I was interested in listening to Srinath's podcast. Now I have actually lost count of how many podcasts he would have given. So I don't bother about listening to any of that anymore. Uh, so the first time I listened to the podcast, I was like, whoa, I didn't even know this guy is who he is. Right. So turns out that his background was he was a Anna University College of Engineering, and he graduated electrical engineering. Did got a job with um, uh, this electrical company, German electrical company, right? AEB or something. No,
ABB? Oh, I
ABB.
think that, yeah,
Yeah,
ABB, I
ABB.
think is Swiss, but yeah, could be German.
Okay, pretty
Swiss German.
close.
Yeah.
No, not so important for what we're talking about.
Right.
ABB. But I think in a couple of years, he was like, this is just a normal job. So he went to Columbia University for a degree in financial engineering, and after that, he actually got into Wall Street, and he was actually like a Wall Street trader. And he didn't like that. Well, he didn't quit his job though. I think, and but he signed up with UIUC for a distance education and masters in aerospace engineering. But he moved to LA so that he can actually be part of like a tribe of rocket enthusiasts or space enthusiasts, startup ecosystem in space, because historically LA has been where like Boeing, Rocketdyne, all of those guys have been there around, and the SpaceX has been there, and so on. So that's the thing about him, right? So he actually kind of figures out like what he needs to do to make the moves. And so he was actually positioned in LA when he used to be hanging around with those guys. And then that's when he discovered the pain point that small satellite people go through. And this is super important for me. I'm not actually telling you Srinath's story as such, right? That's not the intent of what I'm trying to say, because you are better off actually talking to him about his story rather than me telling you about his story. There are certain things that I would like to highlight, right? So one of the things that he did right at least so far, we still don't have like a proper validation of the entire hypothesis of Agnikul, because we still haven't actually got paid by a customer yet, right, to launch a satellite for them and so on. But the basic hypothesis of Agnikul is to alleviate the pain point of small satellite customers. And they have a large wait time. There are uncertainties about when they will get to launch. They can make a satellite very quickly, but they will have to wait for a couple of years to launch. And then during that time, they have to maintain the satellite in a clean room. There are maintenance costs. There are battery replacement costs during this time, and then they have to go through qualification of the batteries one more time if you're changing batteries, and then they have to actually qualify the satellite for electromagnetic interferences and all that stuff with respect to like a major customer that the launch will ultimately take, and where these guys actually doing like a ride share. So there are a lot of pains that a small satellite goes through simply because of the way the launch vehicle construct is as of today, with large launch vehicles that take upwards of about 1,000 kgs, whereas these launches, these satellites would actually be around 100 kgs. So he then realized that, hey, there is a sweet spot, there is a target market that we should be looking at. We should actually make space accessible to a lot of these small satellite players, and so on. So he's also, at least when he started out, he definitely came across as a bit idealistic and a bit naive. And I had a bit of my share trying to chisel him on some realities. So his idealism was that space should actually be accessible to a lot of people. We should be democratizing space access, and getting to space should not be the harder part of working in space, and so on. So lots of these very nice things. So when he came here, he had this name called Agnikul that he had already come up with, which is kind of like a school of fire, if you will. And that's a very nice name, right? So if you think about it, it's sort of like, being humble about wanting to learn how to do things. And so actually he wanted to set up kind of like a non-profit, because he said that space is for everybody. We shouldn't be making money out of it and all that stuff. So I told him, look, everybody clearly understands if you have a profit motive. If you have non-profit, then they will start wondering what other motive do you have that could be hidden and all that stuff. So just be normal. I mean, it's once you make profit, it's up to you to figure out what you want to do, whether you can give it away if you want to make sure it's your non-profit. But it's okay to make profit. There's nothing wrong, right? And then so just do a for-profit company and so on. So that is a kind of little. I mean, I myself am not like very savvy about those kinds of decisions, but this is one little non-technical advice that I could give, and I think the sense prevailed on him, and then he went ahead and made a private limited company. But the point essentially is he had these kinds of idealisms. So when he realized that this is what we need to do, that's when it hit him, is what I can understand, that he can't do this in the US, given the background that he has, and therefore he had to actually explore, coming back to India. And then he decided, for whatever reason, that's a strategist in him, right? So he said that I can't do this without the help of an academic institution. And apparently, he actually wrote to about some 80 plus aerospace engineering professors in India. And I mean, and then I started actually counting, would you have 80 aerospace engineering professors in the country in the first place? Yeah, maybe we have like about 4 IITs and a couple of other pedigreed aerospace institutions, and each of them, if they have about 20, then I think it makes sense. Except that he missed me for whatever reason. So and then. And apparently, like, nobody replied, but the ones who replied was discouraging him, and telling him, you're pretty suicide. So actually, he was working in LA. He was working New York time in LA. So he was still actually doing the New York job, and he was doing the distance education, but like, because it's actually New York time, he gets a lot of time, time in the afternoon in LA. Therefore, therefore he could actually hang out with the space enthusiasts and all that stuff. So that is a kind of like the way he divided his time over there, and then it all of these things dawned on him, and then he started cold mailing people, and then there were discouraging mails and all that stuff, and then he did this four level connect with me, and I mean I didn't really care who he was, what was his background, nothing. I had no idea about it. Right? He said like, we want to make rockets. I said, sure, we can make rockets, no problem. And I knew about all these things that I just mentioned only after listening to a podcast of this. And that, but so the point of the tree is that if the intent is very clear, if there is a commonality of purpose, we just don't bother about. I mean, I felt that uh, he couldn't really screw up. We can manage that because uh, I had some inkling on how to make the rockets, at least the engines part of it, and we could actually connect with ex-ISRO scientists as well as whoever were my contacts in ISRO and so on. So we could take the steps once we get started. So I mean, to me, it seemed like Srinath was actually a nice placeholder, right, from my point of view, to get started on that kind of a journey. Uh, so let him run with it, and then I'll see if I can back him up, and so on. That was actually my thinking about him. So it didn't really matter who he was, what he was. And then he brought in Moin. Moin had some, again, his own interesting story, but neither of them had like any great engineering experience, but none of that mattered to me. I mean, I said, let's get going.
That's a fascinating story, and even more interesting how you all got in touch. And I think just to add to your point about LA, and for the audience, there's this little neighborhood in LA called El Segundo, where a lot of these aerospace companies are based, which probably what you were referring to.
Yeah, he would know that much better than me. Yeah.
Awesome. So there are lots of players or private players these days. Skyroot. There is SpaceX, and Amazon is coming up with Kuiper, and there were a lot of failed projects, if I may call it, even though they were not satellite projects like Google's Project X, Project Loon, I think it was called, with like balloon-based
Right.
launchers and whatnot. What do you think is Agnikul's differentiating factor compared to all these players that are out right now?
Uh, I think it's a bunch of things. It's not just one piece. I mean, for the record, uh, we haven't started making revenues, right? So we are probably about three-fourths of our way, or a little bit more than that, maybe 80% of our way to quote unquote success, if you will, as a business, right? So technically, we may be a success with the launch that we demonstrated. Uh, at least for a suborbital flight where controlled vertical ascent of fully 3D printed rocket engine with semi-cryo combination, all of that stuff, and then our own launch pad. So there are a lot of firsts for India as well as some global firsts were proven, and the flight was perfect, very thankfully. But we still are not a commercial success yet, right? So we have to be measured about claiming success, at least. So to the extent we have come, right, about 80% of the way, there are a bunch of things that are going for it. I think first and foremost, I think is the customer hypothesis, right? I mean, I would actually rate that as the topmost for any startup or any company. Um, if you do not know which customer segment you are targeting, and are you actually solving a real problem for that customer segment, or is it an imagined problem that you have taken fancy to, right? Is there some customer hypothesis validation by talking to customers and seeing that they are indeed interested, they will get alleviated with your solution? I think that's actually the super top most important thing for any startup. In fact, it's called the lean startup model, right? If you were actually doing a startup that should be insured against failure, you better have a very good customer discovery to start with. And that's exactly why I actually went through Srinath's story on how he realized that this is the pain point that he need to solve, sitting in LA with that particular community. And then the next thing, of course, he realizes that being what he was, he can't do this in the US, therefore he has to come back to India. So that actually takes us to the next part of the success, I would say, is the frugality with which we are able to do this, right? I mean, whenever we succeed, and I think now, if I were to be a little bit bolder, uh, we can say it's a question of when instead of if, right? Whenever we succeed, we can actually put a lot of international rocket players to shame with the kind of money that we spend, right, when compared to what they do. And that's a story by a story in itself. I mean, there is super amazing tech that's happening in India, and for like a fraction of the cost. So, I mean, the kind of capital efficiency that we clock is like amazing, and this is something that the world needs to sit up and pay attention to. If I mean, let's say you are a billionaire in the US, right? You'll be smart enough to put money in me rather than put money in the US. And I will say this right in front of anybody, right? We'll just prove that. That's exactly the point. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, really going for us. The third, which is actually very, very important as well, is some kind of globally competent tech that prevails over everybody else, some IP that you have, and that actually should be tied to the business case. So in this case, we are talking about not letting a customer wait for their launch slot, right? It should be a launch on demand, which means that I should be able to make my rocket on demand without any inventory. Like we can't make rockets and pile up in the shelf expecting customers to come. We should essentially be able to, gin up a rocket as soon as a customer shows up, and so on. And that's where the fully single piece 3D printed engine, concept comes in, and we have actually perfected that to the hilt. So the most important thing is to be able to develop a globally competitive tech that is superior to anybody else in the world, with an IP that is actually propelled by the business case that you started out with, right? So it's what are you doing for the customer, and how is your tech suited to the customer? So usually what happens in academia is that you actually are developing some tech, and then you're actually looking for a customer who will know who could be using this. That's really not very good business practice. So I think these three things definitely go for us. I think that can actually ensure us against failure is my. But in space, the problem essentially is that it's actually a digital outcome, right? So one thing among some thousand things that can go wrong. If it goes wrong, and if you have like about a couple of consecutive failures, God forbid, then you might end up closing shop and going back home with nothing. So you got to be extremely careful about having a lot of bravado and thumb chesting and all that stuff. But hopefully, if we do everything right, maybe the third time we will succeed and we will prevail there. We will hang in there, right? And that's what it's all about. I mean, the game is all about like, can I actually hold on to the tether and get up there? And if you look at SpaceX, that's what they did. But I found at least ISRO, uh, beyond those initial failures that they had in the 80s or something of that sort, the kind of string of PSLV successes that they have had is like spectacular. When compared to which, like again, American rockets, they just fail all the time. I mean, like I shouldn't say all the time, but like in the developmental time frame, they just don't care about failures. I mean, which means that they throw away money, they go through a lot of failures. It almost looks like you're looking for a jackpot just because you have money. So I've actually talked to ISRO people on how is it possible for them to succeed so well with very little static testing that they do on the ground before they go up to launches. And with just about couple of successful launches, they now move on to taking commercial payloads and all that stuff. How is it possible for you to actually do very few tests before you actually get to commercial launches and been succeeding continuously? The simple answer I got is that we work on very tight budgets. So that's actually a very important point. It's very important for you not to have money, okay, so that you will actually use your brains instead of actually having a lot of money and frittering it away with lots of failures. This doesn't make sense at all.
Hmm. That is very interesting, and I just want to double down on. You briefly touched on it, but I just want to double down on the frugality aspect, and it was lauded quite a lot across the world with with what we did with Chandrayaan. Space is a very fascinating field, right? Because you need to have 100% success rate. There is no way that you can have 99.9% success rate and it would be called success in the first place.
Yep.
So
Yep.
compared to US, what is the differentiating factor that is making us launch things at such a low cost? I know you touched on lower shoestring budgets and lower testing, etc. But is it the cost of materials? Is it the kind of you know design that we do, or what? Why can we bring down the cost? Because in essence, if US could bring down the cost, or any company could bring down the cost, they might as well, right? So just want to get your thoughts on why that is.
Exactly. So we are doing things right. They are the ones who are actually doing it wrong. So you actually go ask them why are they so expensive? That's their problem. They have not figured out how to actually make themselves cheaper. You have to go ask them why are they so damn expensive. We are doing it right. We know exactly how we are doing it. So we don't. I don't have to explain this, right? They have to explain why they're expensive. I'll flip the question. So the datum is Indian costs, right? Anything above that, you have to explain.
Yeah, I mean
See,
that's actually an interesting take.
you wouldn't expect this answer, right? Yeah, I want to actually make this actually the normal, right? If you want to be smart, you actually do it at our cost, right? Otherwise, you're not smart. Pack.
Hmm. Very interesting take. Yeah. So it's about doing it right, and India is doing it right, and the US is doing something wrong. So they have to go figure it out. Excellent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Just want to
No, I mean, so
move. Hmm.
look at SpaceX. Okay, so
Right.
uh, let's be objective, right? Instead of like having a lot of bravado and all. But I made a point there that the guy who is actually more expensive has to explain rather than the guy who is cheaper. Okay,
Right.
but SpaceX actually has been doing a fantastic job in bringing down the cost. Okay, they are giving a run for the money for everybody else in the world, right? At the scale at which they are doing it. Okay, now there's simply tremendous, tech breakthroughs that they have been clocking that brings down the launch cost. No doubt about that. All right, and yet, if Elon Musk were to actually do this out of India, he would be still cheaper. That's the point I'm trying to make. Right. So you need to ask him why is he actually sitting there and why not here? That's the thing that we have to be talking.
Yeah. Interesting. So that makes me wonder. We have. I mean, at least I can think of two main startups out of India. Skyroot and Agnikul. Uh, are investors and scientists looking at India for more private players to take up space? Because a couple of other things can also play in this, right? One being regulation, the other being a high bar of entry, red tapeism, etc., etc. What is it that is stopping more and more players, or like an exponential growth of private players in India?
Yeah. So the private space industry at the scale that we are talking about, which is so scale has two meanings here. One is like, let's say, small launch vehicles, right? When compared to like a SpaceX level launchers and all that stuff, or even PSLV, GSLV, those kinds of sizes. That's actually the new game here. Doing small launchers, micro satellites or mini satellites. That's actually the game that we are looking at today when compared to the conventional sizes. So that is one aspect about the scale. The second aspect about the scale is many of these guys actually wanting to do small rockets and small satellites. So in that sense, it's actually a large scale, right? So That's what I don't know. I mean, there was a TED talk that I gave about something called defrastructure, which where I basically said we will have a new definition of large, what do you call large scale, which is not about doing something big, but actually doing many small things, many number of small things. So, in that sense, we have a relatively larger number of players that are coming into the market saying that I will want to do small rockets, I want to do small satellites, and all that stuff. And that is actually a new play that's happening around the world, as well as in India. India is actually sort of following the rest of the world, if you will, particularly the US in this market, maybe closely following. I mean, I'm not seeing as much of enthusiasm in other parts of the world beyond US other than India, right? I mean, if you look at if you have like US startups, I think India startups are probably number two, but maybe a distant second, but maybe the number three is somewhere else, right, and so on. So in that sense, like, I think it's worth paying attention to, but it's actually a new play for India. So we do not know where we are going with this, right? What is the amount of room we have for how many players to prevail in the market, and over what time period? We have absolutely no idea. So one of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about. So I have been a early player in this, if you will, because of that particular day when Srinath contacted me, and I jumped into it, and so on. Then my later on is then not too much later on, right? Within a year or so, uh, my first set of uh, Avishkar Hyperloop students, graduated, and then they started Galaxy. So I also have a satellite startup. So if you look at two major things that a space agency would do, like let's say you look at ISRO, they do the rockets in Trivandrum and so on, and then they do the satellites in Bangalore and all that stuff, right? So those are the two major things that you do. So we have a satellite, we have a rocket startup, we have a satellite startup that I'm part of. So some investor actually came to me and said that he was scoping around what is the space tech scene in India, and then he said he quickly figured out that I held about 50% of it and stuff, right? So, I mean, I don't know what exactly he meant, but we are covering, let's say, rockets and satellites. The two major things that people normally focus on. So the question basically is, if let's say these two exist, and then we have Skyroot for another rocket company, which is actually bigger than what Agnikul does right now. And so we have like about two rocket companies, and then maybe we have about three or four satellite companies, which is fair because satellites are smaller, and right, there is room for Earth observation satellite versus the communication satellites and maybe some other payloads. So you can simply come up with a satellite bus and then look for whoever wants to actually attach a payload and then put a satellite together quickly. All of those things like Dhruva Space is there, Pixel is there, and Astrome. There are about at least about three or four such companies. Now the question is, do we have room for any more? And I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that, right? So across the world, maybe mostly in the US, there were at some point 1,200 satellite companies. Okay. The problem essentially with these very staggering numbers is that about 90% of them are actually just a PowerPoint presentation. Right. Beyond a deck, right? They can't take the next step and so on. And that's also true with, I mean, there are many guys who actually come up to me, LinkedIn connects, wanting to set up a talk with me. And then I do, I do actually spend like some of my Sundays talking to them. They show me like firing a rocket engine in their backyard or in their college or some remote location, and then they have like aspirations to make like some very large engines and then big rockets and all that stuff. It's hard for me to tell if they will actually grow or they will not get investors simply because some couple of rocket guys are already squatting in the space. Will they be perceived as ahead of the game, and therefore investors may not put in money, and so on. So we don't know how it, because on the other hand, investors are actually gung ho about space tech for whatever reason. Nobody really has an idea of what is this market going to be like and what's the market size that we can clock sitting in India, right? I mean, again, there are some limitations about doing all these things out of India in terms of accessing global markets and all that stuff. And most of the market would actually be global. and all that, right? So considering that we don't know what is investor sentiment about, or investor appetite completely about these things, but investors also actually blindly put in money saying that space is hot right now, let me just throw in. They could have a FOMO that they actually have got left out of either Agnikul or Skyroot, whatever. So a lot of reasons why, or basically one of the founders of this other company was like so charming that they just didn't care. They just threw the money at him. It's easier to actually, relatively easier to get seed funding, and then the next levels of funding is where people will ask the harder, tougher questions on when are you going to market, when are you going to get revenues, and so on, for which it may be very difficult to get answers. So I think the market is actually finding its own equilibrium. Let's put it that way, right? And that's where we are. The red tape part, amazingly, does not exist. Yeah. So with the InSpace coming in, ISRO, the ISRO chairman personally, right, as an individual gem of a guy, uh, and ISRO is made of scientists who actually are tech hungry, right? So they just like objectively like technology. They don't care, whether they are doing the technology, somebody else is doing the technology. It doesn't matter. If they see tech, they're like, wow, let's jump on this, let's support this. Let me help you with whatever little I know. It's a really amazing situation. I mean, if ever you were to actually do anything space tech, India is the best place today, and today is the best place anywhere in the world that you can think of. This is truly amazing.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Um, I want to get into the investor thing. You were mentioning about investors uh, wanting to invest in players. I mean, I don't want to call incumbent players, but like Skyroot and Agnikul, who are ahead of the curve. How tough was it to get first investors? Because even though we are doing all of this in a shoestring budget with extreme frugality, it is still a heavily capex based or investment based business, right? So how did you get someone like, say, an Anupam Mittal on board? I would love to know what was the pitch like to the investors?
No, most of that is actually done by Srinath,
Hmm.
and sometimes he uh, calls me for pitching or for additional questions to be answered, and all that stuff, like, or give a perspective about how what's our game and all those things. But and I used to be actually going for a lot of pitching in the early days myself, all the time with lots of investors. But lately, I think I'm not having to do too much of pitching. Some people will probably want to do like a due diligence, wanting to check out the other founder, right? So they would set up a separate call with me and so on.
Hmm.
So I don't know exactly what stories he tells, but there is only one story, as far as I know, which is launch anywhere, anytime, affordably. That's basically the mantra that we go with. That's a tagline that we have. And I had actually early on worked with them and with their team on actually quantifying what is meant by anywhere, what's meant by anytime, what's meant by affordably, and all those things. So we have a very solid foundation on what we are talking about and what's our goal, what do we want to achieve, and which market are we after. All of these things is really covered, right? And when I say all these things, a lot of people actually sort of uh, are puzzled. How is a prof actually talking about markets and customers and all those things? But that's what entrepreneurship is all about, and they like hearing all of that stuff. But uh, Srinath is a nice storyteller. He in fact went to, when he was in New York. He actually signed up for script writing, movie script writing. So he had actually taken lessons on that. So if he had not done rockets, he would have probably been like in movies and so on. And it's possible that he will still do movies, after his first few rockets,
Yeah.
because or people will make movies of him and so on. Right?
Yeah, I
So
mean, Rocketry would have been a ideal name if something is made on him.
correct.
But
So
yeah.
yeah. So the point is, I think so. He has his own way of actually communicating
Hmm.
And he comes across as extremely humble and passionate and all that stuff. So that's very nice. The early days were actually very difficult. In fact, the first investor that came to us is the one who actually also told us that there is a competitor in the first place.
Interesting.
Okay, and he said that I'm actually choosing you over the other one, and we are like, which one?
There is another one.
Yeah, I mean, are there more idiots? So yeah, that's so we were lucky with the first one, but it took a while for us to actually even get there, right? So it took like what some nearly 9 months to a year of bootstrapping before we could get a first investor's attention. But the second round investors were extremely difficult. I think Srinath probably had knocked at the doors of around 250 investors before he could get one. Or I mean, he has the database of how many no's and how many uh, probable and the how many SS and all that stuff. The percentage was extremely low. And
What were some of the feedbacks that you guys got? Because I can guess that, hey, you guys are doing something too audacious. This is not scalable. This is not viable in India. But I'm just looking for something constructive that probably helped you guys from
I
a
know, I
feedback.
think the story has been shifting, right?
Hmm.
The questions have been shifting. So the initial storyline was, I mean, the initial questions were, I mean, are you guys real? I mean, what are you smoking? And
Yeah.
right, why are you doing this? So they just wouldn't believe that we can actually do all these things out of India.
Hmm.
In fact, Naval Ravikant, when he talked to me, his point was essentially that, I mean, he was actually talking to me about E-plane after knowing that uh, we were also doing Agnikul and so on, and he was actually completely puzzled by what I was up to, right, with my combustion center and the startups that I'm supporting and being part of and all that stuff. And he was like, "Look, the reason why I want to be with you is that first of all, you guys have some globally competitive tech, which we should be proud about. Second is you do things very frugally. And third, the fact that you're actually doing this out of India is actually going to become a world story, world news, and I want to be part of that." Is what he said, and that's what it was. Like a lot of people wouldn't even believe that we could do these kinds of things, and investors have no way of actually assessing whether we are real. What we are saying is for real, right? Because they have just not been in the space. They don't know enough, so they need to actually have technical DD done by somebody that they would trust. Space is actually an extremely closed environment. There are only ISRO scientists who know the reality about it. And many of the ISRO scientists are governmental types. They wouldn't actually rub shoulders with investors, right? So they're actually two different worlds completely, right? So if the investor wants like a third party opinion, we will have to set up a ISRO scientist to.
No, that's true. I mean, expertise in something like this is quite rare. Yeah.
Correct. So all of that stuff, we had to wait through all that. But as we progress, I think, in fact, the first two rounds of Agnikul, I'm actually super, super, grateful to those investors specifically because I was extremely jittery. I personally, among the co-founders, was actually extremely jittery, considering that I actually am a prof at IITM, right? And my job is not in jeopardy or anything like that. And these guys are the ones who are sticking it out there. I was actually jittery simply because there were no laws that existed for us to be able to launch out of India, right? So, and I used to do quite a bit of traveling for Agnikul back then, and even now, if required, I would do. But these guys are doing it a lot by themselves. There was once I actually went to Delhi for some reason, and then Srinath and Moin told me there is this space law lawyer in Delhi. Why don't you actually go meet her, on your way back from, way back to the airport? So I did go to her law office, and I met her. And I first of all, I didn't know that there was something called space law in India, right? So because there was nothing, absolutely nothing, and maybe she was actually, specializing in international space law, if one such thing existed in the first place. I had no idea about all that stuff. So I sat in front of her and I said that, look, there is no law in India that talks about space launches by private rockets. So if we were to actually go ahead and do that, there is absolutely no law that we would be breaking, right? So why would that be a problem? Because we cannot be arrested on any law because there is no law that we're breaking, right? Uh, so she just gave a stare at me and then said, "If in doubt, you're always in the wrong." Right? They will arrest you. Then they will figure out which law to apply. Right? I came back and said, "Boss, this is serious." And despite that, by 2019, right, we had the second round of investors come along with absolutely no government support until which didn't happen until May of 2020, when following the COVID this thing epidemic, there was this what is the thing called um, stimulus package that all the governments in the world were actually announcing for their countries. So I think the finance minister actually had a stimulus package that was announced in India in May of 2020. And as part of the stimulus package, all of a sudden, she talks about like this in space being set up and space being opened up. And I'm like, where did that come from? All of a sudden in this, COVID epidemic, that's actually a huge windfall. And that's what is actually, cut loose all the red tape that you alluded to. So we've been extremely lucky. We've been at the right place at the right time. But investors, the early investors took bets, but the later investors are now more bothered about, how much deep pockets would you need, and where are the customers, and what will be your go-to market? When are you going to get revenues? Those kinds of questions, which are actually very practical questions to ask over this kind of time period. And we need to answer them because we are actually at the threshold of getting commercial.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That is fascinating. I mean, you are a professor at IITM. You help Agnikul right now, and you also have a eVTOL company, and we'll dive into what that is and all of that, called ePlane AI. And you mentioned about how Naval Ravikant reached out and was extremely interested in it.
No. Srinath reached out to him, and then I had a conversation with him.
Okay. But this is fascinating, right? I mean, he's one of the most sought after investors in this world, and it's crazy how people are looking at startups based in India. So that's a fascinating story in itself. But before we dive into the company itself, let's maybe give the audience a 101 on what eVTOL is, and how is it different from a normal helicopter for someone who is encountering the name for the first time.
So eVTOL stands for electric vertical takeoff and landing. But that by itself, it's sort of like a not a complete definition. You have to say electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. So so eVTOLs are essentially a new breed of aircraft which are definitely electric to begin with, and vertical takeoff and landing signifies that they could take off like a helicopter, or more than a helicopter, it could be more like a drone, like a multi-copter drone, typically. And then you could actually have just a multi-copter configuration itself for your eVTOL. So it could be just a big drone with a cabin where people can sit in and fly, or you could also actually have wings and then fly forward like a plane once you have taken off like a drone, and then again get back to landing vertically like a drone. So that's what is called like a hybrid, what do you call, fixed wing VTOL hybrid, right? So you have a combination of both fixed wing, like an aircraft, like a plane, and a VTOL like a drone. So that's essentially the combination that marks what's an eVTOL today. So the biggest difference is that you take off vertically and land vertically like a drone rather than a helicopter, in the sense you don't have like this single large rotor. You have multiple smaller vertical rotors like a drone. Yeah, so that's what it is.
Hmm. And how did an idea for such a startup germinate?
I think I've actually mentioned this several times around. So that was essentially like a video that I was watching on October 1st of 2016 um, of this person called Professor Tony Seba of Stanford, who is essentially predicting that by 2030 all cars will become electric,
Hmm.
and that's around the time that we were just establishing the combustion center, and we had the combustion center that I was heading and setting up at IIT Madras, a fairly large enterprise by itself, um, and the largest of its kind in many ways. Uh, we had essentially automotive combustion, thermal power, and aerospace propulsion as like the three major pillars of the combustion center. So Tony Sebo was basically saying that by 2030, all cars will become electric, and all the electricity for the cars will come from solar. So which essentially means that he was knocking off two of the pillars of those three, which is thermal power and automotive combustion, and I was left with like one pillar on which the combustion center would stand, which is aerospace propulsion, which is what I belong to. As a person, I was coordinating this for a lot of my faculty colleagues who are from other departments as well, and so on. It's an interdisciplinary, interdepartmental center. So I wouldn't have actually lost out if aerospace propulsion were to stay back with combustion. But then I started asking the question, what if aerospace propulsion is also challenged, on combustion and migrate to electric? And I mean, I had some sense of numbers and scales and magnitudes and all that stuff to tell me that until I retire, which will be about 2034, rockets might not become fully electric, but there was a chance that aircraft might become electric. So that kind of scared me.
Hmm.
So, so my question was, do I actually live in denial for the next, 18 years, um, and then continue to do combustion, and then, uh, you know, uh, and then fade away to oblivion, or do I actually take the bull by its horns and jump into the new thing, and lead the way and be the change that I want to see, or whatever. Lots of ways by which you can say this, phrase this. Yeah, so I decided to do the latter.
Yeah. I mean, how far are we from that 2030 dream of all cars being electric? I think quite far away because um, I know a lot of countries have adopted electric in a big way, like Norway, China. But at least in the US, there is a lot of pushback. I wouldn't say pushback, but there is definitely a lot of propaganda from companies like Toyota and Honda saying that, hey, hydrogen is the future, electric isn't. What is your stand on all this?
No, I mean, I'm not going to, what do you call, vouch for Tony Seba's prediction, but
Yeah.
I mean, that video that I saw was actually really persuasive. The way he had actually put out things that was data driven and all that stuff. Um, but at the end of the day, it's all about the economics for the customer, right? So I think he had cost curves for batteries, cost curves for um, or energy curves for batteries and all that stuff. Where he had a way by which you would actually sort of put a log scale to things, so that whatever curves you got could actually be made into straight lines. So most curves will actually fit a power law profile. So if you make it a log scale, then you can actually put them in a straight line, and then that allows you to extrapolate, and then
Hmm.
you can hit the x-axis at some particular year, and then say that by this time this will happen, sort of thing. Like, or your cost will come below this level, and the energy densities will go beyond that level, and all that stuff. So he had that way of presenting it. I think later on, after that particular video, he has actually gone ahead and written a book on it, on all of that stuff. So I think the world is extremely nonlinear, and things could suddenly change. There could be a tipping point, but the tipping point will actually be in favor of the unit economics for the customer. If suddenly like over a 1 year period, a lot of people start thinking that, hey, wait a minute, I think electric cars make more sense for my pocket. I think that the tipping point will happen, and then everybody else will be actually, wringing their fists and saying, oh my God, I didn't expect this to happen.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's the only way you can persuade someone to get electric. I mean, everything else is just white noise in a way. Uh,
No, I mean, we don't, that's what I'm trying to say. In reality, nobody gets actually persuaded, right? The economics speaks for itself. There could be early adopters, and they may be gritting their teeth, or they may be bragging about it, whatever it is, which is not exactly an economical way of doing it. But a lot of other people are actually waiting and watching for the economics to bear out. Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense. With E-plane, how far have you gotten, and what are some of the big challenges that you are facing in terms of, let's say, I think one of the things that comes to mind is battery, right? I mean, it's a significant part of the aircraft, and
Uh,
battery technology, lithium ion versus solid state. What are some of the challenges that you're facing right now?
yeah. So if you know that battery is actually it's going to be the biggest hurdle, you don't break your head against it. You just say that, okay, everybody else is going to have the same problem. Are there other things that we can actually focus on, where we can actually gain some brownie points? Right. So there is a lot of work to be done on aerodynamics. There is a lot of work to be done on lightweighting structures. There is a lot of work to be done on the propulsion. So pick on each one of those, and put a puzzle together where you still live with the inferiority of the batteries and see where you can get with it. And that's essentially been our approach. Uh, I mean, I'm also kind of trying to cover up on my ignorance about the electrical side of things, because I'm basically an aerospace engineer with a combustion background. So people end up doing what they can instead of, to begin with, at least. So my starting point is aerospace. So um, I can think of the aerodynamics of it. I can think of the propulsion side of things, and structurally as well, and so on. These are some of it is commonsensical. And in battery packing could actually be commonsensical, but to get down to the cell level is actually where the challenge is, and so on. So yeah, I mean, we work with these constraints, but we see what else we can do to improve our lot. That's been our thesis. So we would probably have about the same performance, or maybe slightly better, than who are all now currently considered to be the world's best. Yeah.
That's interesting. Are you looking at trends in battery technology across the world, and do you see any signs of maybe the weight coming down or energy per kilogram going up, or something of that sort?
The energy per kilogram is actually definitely going up.
Hmm.
The energy density is definitely going up. You can get that sense. The challenge is actually correspondingly the power density. So, I mean, honestly speaking, I would be a lot happier if we were to actually do a conventional takeoff plane. But for the foreseeable future, we are not seeing energy densities permitting us to do airport to airport kind of, uh, you know, flights with electric planes. That would be really awesome. And I'm actually
Why
looking.
not? I mean, because I mean, looking at the range is something like 200 to 250. Uh, let's say a Kozhikode to Coimbatore, or maybe a Chennai to Tirupati. It's quite doable, right?
Yes. So the point essentially is, I have actually talked to some airline people, by the way,
Uh-huh.
right? And people have different sense about these things. Um, because planes take a little while for you to make and get certified and all that stuff.
Right.
You start with making a plane for about 250 kilometers, where the segment of air travel is actually extremely narrow. And it takes about 5 years, or 5 years to 7 years or 8 years, I don't know, whatever time for you to make those kinds of planes. The question is, for those short distances, what will actually be the number of passengers that you will have in the plane? Will it be actually more like a Boeing 737 with a 150 seater, but all electric with just about a 250-kilometer range. Will there be enough people? Yeah, Chennai to Tirupati, yeah, sure, why not? Right, you could probably find people who do that. But the thing is, when you now get to shorter and shorter distances, people don't want to actually go to an airport and then go through a security check and all that stuff for for just a little hop, which is about half an hour away, and then go to another airport, and from there, which is actually remote from the actual city, they might as well actually get in a car and then do this in about 3 hours completely, and so on. So there is only so much you can actually do with much shorter distances.
Yeah.
So
Just
people
on that
actually,
note, so I don't know if India follows this hub and spoke model, but in the US, most of the airlines have this hub and spoke model where there is a big airport like Charlotte or an Atlanta, and then shorter flights take off from there to smaller cities. So yeah, I mean, now that I'm thinking out loud, that could be a potential use case.
well, I think the world over, the hub and spoke model is actually getting dismantled, by the way,
Yeah.
because you have leaner, meaner aircraft that can take you from point to point instead of having to go to your nearest hub and then fly to the next hub and then from there. So it becomes a three-legged journey. Instead, is it possible for me to actually fly from my place to another place directly? So you look at what Indigo does; they don't really have a hub and spoke, and they are probably one of the best airlines in the world in terms of
Actually,
profits.
one of the most profitable airlines in the US, Southwest Airlines, they don't have a hub and spoke model either. So
So no, I think that model is actually getting fast dismantled. So it's possible that some of the big airlines in the US are still following that because of the sunk cost. Right. For example, Delta would have actually put in a lot of money in their Atlanta facilities and all that stuff. So it's a little difficult for them to actually dismantle that and move on and so on. But like some new age airlines, like for example Indigo, right? They had no such pedigree, so they just started off just roaming around across the entire country without having a specific hub. And now it almost looks like every airport is Indigo's hub. Right. So, I mean, you have to always look at first principles, right? Not necessarily look at what other people have been doing in the past. And that's exactly what Indigo did. So, I feel that if you were to actually breach like a 400-kilometer mark, we can do conventional takeoff electric craft, and that would actually be super because you'll be able to halve the cost of air travel, and the ticket prices will actually get slashed, and we will be able to give Vande Bharat a run for its money. I mean, all these things are amazing, right? So I mean, think about it, right? So suddenly there are these trains that are actually much faster and they are a bit more expensive, and then suddenly we are saying, no, I'll actually have a plane that's that's beating it in price. All of these things that's exactly what this decade is all about.
yeah.
Where so many interesting changes, and I'm actually so fortunate to be in the middle of all of that. But coming back to VTOLs, right? We got distracted by the CTOLs, but the VTOLs, yeah, I think batteries are a pain because power is actually the issue for the takeoff and the landing. And so where you have energy densities climb up, you're not really seeing power densities catch up, and you need to have probably some new architectures to beat that particular conundrum. Yeah, but so there's quite a bit of work to do.
Interesting. Yeah, I think if there are CTOLs with a 400-kilometer range, I think that will solve two problems. A, better for the environment, and B, I've heard Nambi Narayan talk about how he just hates the fact that India, being so forward in space technology, does not have an aircraft manufacturer. He talks about how countries like Brazil, which has Embraer, and US Cessna, etc. I mean, obviously, wide body jets, transcontinental flights are extremely expensive to make, and maybe it will take a consortium of countries like Airbus. But
No, doesn't have to be.
doesn't have to be. uh,
We just have to get there.
yeah. I mean, I love the attitude and approach, but yeah, I mean, I think for a start, maybe smaller aircrafts that would be nice. So a 400-kilometer electric CTOL would be a perfect fit for this. Yeah.
I suppose so. We just have to wait and watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Dr. Satya, thank you so much for your time. It was lovely chatting about Agnikul and E-Plane, and I really look forward to what all you try to achieve in the future, and we'll follow the companies closely.
Thank you so much, Bala.
Yeah.
No, great chatting with you.